That one? Okay. Thank you so much, but please be seated.
I could say an awful lot about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I had a lot of alternative plans. But yesterday, there was a prayer for Ruth published in Lilith. Did you happen to read it? You've been traveling. It was written by Abby Pogrebin. It's very short, and I'd like to read it. At a time as disquieting as this, when so many of us feel deflated, shaken, worried for the future, when we almost can't remember what it's like to go a day without name-calling, without lies, harshness, or callousness, when we're nostalgic for those halcyon years of complete sentences, dignified statesmanship, acts of empathy. We still look to you, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, yeshiva girl turned legendary justice, RBG icon, fighter for the powerless and wronged. May you go from strength to strength because you have been ours. May you live many more years because you make the world brighter, fairer, kinder. Because we need you. You've helped us remain clear, not just on the foundational principles of the nation, but on our Jewish mandate to welcome the stranger and never stand idly by. The Hebrew words on your office wall in calligraphy read, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof, justice, justice, shall thou pursue. And you're certainly a justice who is pursued. You have and will keep trying. God bless Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And welcome Jane Eisner, the intrepid editor of The Forward, my friend, my icon, and I'm happy to welcome both of you.
Well, thank you all. Thank you to everyone coming here to Addis, Israel. To those of you who are watching this at Forward.com and on Facebook, we welcome you. It is such a thrill and a pleasure for me and on behalf of all of my colleagues to participate in such an important event. In the last few weeks, we've asked Forward readers to send us their questions for Justice Ginsburg, and the response has been overwhelming. We heard from readers all across the country and from overseas as well. Tonight, I will quote from some of these questions in our conversation because they are brilliant and funny, and they're a powerful reflection of how interested Americans truly are in the United States Supreme Court, and especially in this United States Supreme Court justice. I do want to say at the outset that Justice Ginsburg has asked that we not discuss issues that are before the court or may be before the court. And of course, we're respecting that. Happily, there are so many other topics to talk about. Justice Ginsburg, many readers of ours are interested in your Jewish life and identity and how it shaped your judicial career and your outlook. And as we sit in this beautiful sanctuary, this seems like a very good place to start. You grew up in Brooklyn from a family, okay, let's hear it for Brooklyn. A family that was not devout, but very identified. You have described your mother, your beloved mother, lighting candles on Friday nights. And I've heard how you've enjoyed celebrating Passover with your family. You've remarked that the 4 questions was the best part of the Seder. I'm wondering why.
A child, the youngest child, is asking about this evening in this celebration. Why is Passover night different from all other nights? It's a child asking a question, and the rest of the Seder is devoted to answering that child's question. I think it's just one of many illustrations of how Jews Jews honor learning and want children to be well educated.
A couple of years ago with Rabbi Holtzblatt, you wrote about the heroic and visionary women in the Passover story. And I'm just wondering, did you notice all that when you were a girl, or is that the kind of thing that emerged later in life for you, this recognition of the role of women in this story?
Lauren was the prime mover in this venture. I think growing up, I might have known about Miriam and Moses' mother, but I didn't know about the midwives, and I knew about the Pharaoh's daughter. But the Passover Seder, the Haggadah, there were no women in it.
That's true. And so you've worked to make a difference in that regard. And I understand that was something that you were aware of as a girl as well, your limitations. The boys were having bar mitzvahs, and girls could not. And your mother had very strict Orthodox upbringing. And I'm just wondering how that experience of being a girl at a time when girls and women had very little or no role in religious life, how did that affect you? Did it inspire you, or was it something that you wanted to change?
Of course I wanted to change it. I wanted to have a big party for Bar Mitzvah and get all those presents that I grew up with a cousin. We lived in the same household. 2 sisters married 2 brothers. We were 3 months apart. We were like twins, and he was Bar Mitzvah and had this great party and all the gifts. I was very jealous.
Well, later on in life, I've read that you traced the Jewish presence on the Supreme Court, beginning not with Justice Louis Brandeis, the first justice, but actually with Judah Benjamin, who was the first Jew to be offered a seat in the United States Supreme Court, but who declined. And in fact, he became a leader of the Confederacy. And I'm wondering, why do you start there in thinking about the Jewish presence on the court?
I don't think of Benjamin as present on the court. Jews come in all sizes and shapes, and some are very good and some are not so good. Benjamin was a very interesting character. He did have an Orthodox Jewish upbringing, but he married out of the faith. His story is intriguing, and he rose to the top of the ranks in the Confederacy. In fact, the reason he turned down the Supreme Court appointment was he had just been chosen by the Louisiana legislature to be Louisiana's senator. These are days before the 17th Amendment, so senators were chosen by the state legislature, not by direct vote. And he thought, all things considered, being a senator was a better job for him. He might have envisioned that if he'd been on the court, it wouldn't be too many years before he had to resign.
So we have a question from...
I just wanted to say something more
Please.
about it. Although he was a leader of the Confederacy, he was a slaveholder, he was subject to virulent anti-Semitism by others high in the ranks of the Confederacy. They referred to him as Judas Iscariot.
Wow. It's true, and I know recently we ran a story about Confederate monuments because there was so much controversy about them, and there's actually no monument to him, even though he was a leader of the Confederacy. And it may be just because of what you said, of the way he was treated among the other Confederate leaders.
They do have some considerable exhibition about Benjamin in the museum in New Orleans.
And have you seen it?
Yes.
Wow. We have a question from Michael Rosenzweig, a reader in Georgia. He wondered how your Jewishness has affected your life's work, as a lawyer, a law professor, a feminist, and a Supreme Court justice?
Perhaps I should start by saying I grew up in the shadow of World War II, and we came to know more and more what was happening to the Jews in Europe. The sense of being an outsider, of being one of the people who had suffered oppression for no sensible reason. It's the sense of being part of a minority. It makes you more empathetic to other people who are not insiders, who are outsiders. I would say that, and love of learning, the sense of being a member of a minority group that somehow has survived generations and generations of hatred and plundering. But the idea, I could think of my own family. My father came from Russia when he was 13. He never went to school in any country. He went to a cheder in his shtetl in outside Odessa. And my mother was the first person in her large family born in the USA. She was born 4 months after her mother arrived here, so she was conceived in the old world, born in the new world. And both of them, more than anything else, wanted me to have a good education. That was number one on their list of what I should have.
You mentioned growing up in the shadow of World War II and the Holocaust, and I'm wondering if that shaped your views of human rights and human rights law.
It's certainly a large part of it. I think you probably know that the Holocaust was the beginning of the end of apartheid in America. We were fighting a war against odious racism, and our own troops in that war until the very end were rigidly separated by race. So when we were fighting a war against racism, how long could segregation in our own country persist? So I consider World War II one of the major propelling forces to the Brown v. Board of Education decision.
So you see a connection between that and then what especially many of those African American soldiers faced coming back to the States after they had fought and then came back as essentially second-class citizens.
Yes.
That's so interesting. You feel secure now as a Jew, I sense. The beautiful poem that we heard referenced the artwork that's on the walls of your chamber, and there's a mezuzah on the door. And I'm just wondering, in your time on the court, how has it accommodated Jewish tradition, and has that changed while you've been there?
There hadn't been a Jewish justice for some years, from Abe Fortas and from my appointment. The clerk of the Supreme Court, Clerk Souter, came to see me very early on in my tenure, and he said, "I'm very glad you're here because you can help me with a problem." The Supreme Court admits lawyers to membership in the Supreme Court bar. And every year they would get, a half a dozen or more complaints from Orthodox Jews who said, "We're so proud of our membership in the Supreme Court bar, but we can't frame our certificate and put it on the wall because it said in the year of our Lord, so-and-so, and he's not our Lord. So I spoke to the chief about this. He said, we'll take it up at conference. And one of my colleagues, whose name I will not disclose, said, in the year of our Lord was good enough for Brandeis, it was good enough for Cardozo, it was good enough for Frankfurter, it was good enough even for Goldberg. And before he got to Fortis, I said, it's not good enough for Ginsburg. It took a while for the cycle to complete, because first they said, all right, for the Orthodox Jews will have just in the year so-and-so. And then there were some complaints. We liked what it said on the certificate of the independence of the United States. So please keep that on our certificate. Now, if you want a certificate showing your membership in the Supreme Court bar, you have your choice. You can have just the year 2018 and the year of our Lord so-and-so, or the independence of the United States. It's the way it should be. It's your choice, what you want it to be.
Wow.
And then the next was the great Yom Kippur controversy. Usually the high holy days come out before the court starts up, but sometimes they overlap. So Justice Breyer and I, Justice Kagan was not yet on the court, asked the chief if the court could defer the sitting day. And first response was, we confer on Good Friday. Nobody complains about that. I'd be happy to come Thursday that week. Then I think the argument that was utterly convincing for the chief was that inevitably in an argument session there will be Jewish lawyers. And do you want to put them, and this is their day at the Supreme Court. They've worked so hard on this case. Do you want to take away from them the opportunity to present their case and require them to have a substitute? And that resonated. And so now we don't sit on the high holy days.
Wow. So one of our readers, Jesse Lempel of Cambridge, Massachusetts, had a really interesting question. He noted that you once described an opinion by Israeli Justice Aharon Barak that forbid torture even in what they call the ticking time bomb situations. And you said that you thought that opinion had tremendous persuasive value. So I'm wondering, as an American Jewish jurist, do you feel any special affinity with the work of the Israeli Supreme Court?
I feel a special affinity to the work of Aharon Barak. He's one of the most brilliant jurists of our time. As you know, Israel doesn't have a constitution, but they have 5 basic laws. And the Israeli Supreme Court has a wealth of law to draw on. They have Ottoman Empire law. They have the heritage from the United Kingdom. They have Jewish law. The case that you mentioned, the so-called ticking bomb case, presented to the Israeli Supreme Court this question. The police have apprehended a suspect they believe to know when and where a bomb is going off. Can we use extreme means, a euphemism for torture, to extract that information? And in a very eloquent judgment, written by then President of the Israeli Supreme Court, Barak, the answer was clear. Torture never. And the opinion explained that there's no greater gift we can give to our enemy than to become so overwhelmed by our concern for security that more and more we come to resemble our enemy in our disrespect for human rights.
I wonder if we can turn to your personal history for a moment. Your sister, your only sibling, died when she was 6 and you were less than 2 years old. Your beloved mother was stricken with cancer during your first year in high school and just sadly died 2 days before your graduation. I'm just wondering how this affected your sense of wanting to support women and girls. And in particular, I understand how much of an inspiration your mother was. I'm wondering if you want to tell us a little bit about that.
My mother was a hugely intelligent woman. She emphasized 2 things. One was that I should be a lady, and by that she didn't mean fancy dress. What she meant is be in control of your emotions and don't give way to anger, to remorse, to envy. Those emotions just sap strength and don't enable you to move forward. And her other message was be independent. I suppose she hoped that someday I would meet and marry Prince Charming. But nevertheless, she emphasized the importance of being able to fend for myself.
Well, and you did marry your Prince Charming, right? Marty Ginsburg, your long time partner. But early on in your marriage, there was more adversity. He was stricken very sick with cancer. You yourself have battled it twice. And as one of our readers asked, I'm wondering, how do you keep going under such challenging circumstances? Where do you draw your strength?
I think the hardest time was when Marty had a testicular cancer. There was no chemotherapy. There was massive surgery and daily radiation. But we always, we got through each day, and we're thankful that we had. And we never thought anything other than that he would live as he did. And I was similarly inspired when I had pancreatic cancer by Marilyn Horne, who is a great mezzo. And when she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, that was her attitude: I will live. And she is still very much alive.
Wow, that is amazing. I'd like to turn now to your long and admirable championing of gender equality. I know that you have discussed those early cases in the public before, but I wonder if you might share with our audience tonight just one of your favorite cases, one of the things that you think had the most impact early on in this new field.
Well, before I answer that question, I brought along with me there was not too much to inspire young women in my days. There was Nancy Drew, and that was just about it. But it's not in this one. I read something by a very young woman. She was barely 15 when she wrote it. And if I can find it here. Let's see. So as I said, these are the words of a young woman just turning 15. One of the many questions that has often bothered me is why women have been, and still are, thought to be so inferior to men. It's easy to say it's unfair, but that's not good enough for me. I'd like to know the reason for this great injustice. Men presumably dominated women from the very beginning because of their greater physical strength. It's men who earn a living, beget children, and do as they please. Until recently, women silently went along with this, which was stupid. Since the longer it's kept up, the more deeply entrenched it becomes. Fortunately, education, work, and progress have opened women's eyes. In many countries, they've been granted equal rights. Many people, mainly women, but also men, now realize how wrong it was to tolerate this state of affairs for so long. The letter is signed, yours, Anne M. Frank. It was one of the last entries made in her diary. I think this audience knows. She was born in the Netherlands in 1929, and she died in 1945 while imprisoned at Bergen-Belsen, just 3 months short of her 16th birthday. Isn't that amazing that a child would write such a thing?
It really is. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think we overlook that aspect of her writing in her diary. Wow, thank you. Well, a
So
lot of...
you asked about the gender discrimination litigation.
Yes.
To pick a favorite is a little like asking me which of my 4 grandchildren and 2 step-grandchildren. But I think to illustrate the arbitrariness of gender-based discrimination, Stephen Weisenfeld's case is as good as any other. And this was Stephen Weisenfeld's story. He was married to a woman who taught in a public high school. She earned a little more money than he did. She had a healthy pregnancy. She taught into the 9th month. At the hospital, the doctor came out and told Stephen, "You have a healthy baby boy, but your wife died of an embolism." Stephen Weisenfeld decided at that moment that he would personally care for his infant, that he would not work full-time until the child was in school full-time. So he had heard about something called child in care benefits that Social Security afforded. He went down to the local Social Security office, and he said, "I'd like to apply for child in care benefits." The benefits were arranged so that you could earn up to a certain amount and still get the benefits. Once you went above that amount, your benefit was reduced dollar for dollar. But Stephen thought that with the Social Security benefits and his part-time earning, he could just about make it. He was told by the attendant at the Social Security office, "These are mothers' benefits. They're not available to fathers." So we're in the early 70s now, and Stephen Weisenfeld writes a letter to the editor of his local Edison, New Jersey newspaper. It goes like this: "I hear a lot these days about women's lib. Let me tell you my story." And then he recites what happened at the Social Security office, and his tagline was, "Does Gloria Steinem know about this?" Well, I was teaching at Rutgers at the time. A woman who taught on the Spanish faculty lived in the same town, read the letter, called Stephen Weisenfeld and suggested that he contact the New Jersey affiliate of the American Civil Liberties Union. And that's how his case began.